I'm back in the Mojave Desert, this time headed to the Mitchell Caverns, which are located on the eastern foothills of the Providence Mountains State Recreation Area. If you're coming from Southern California, head north on I-15, then merge onto Highway 40 towards Needles. You'll exit on E6 Road and just follow the lonely trail till you arrive. The Mitchell Caverns became part of the California State Reserve in 1954 and became a state recreation area in 1972. Since this area is preserved, free exploration of the caverns is not permitted, so the only way to see them is through guided tour. I should probably mention that you should plan ahead of time and make a reservation way out in advance. The caverns had been closed to the public for the past 8 years or so, and just recently reopened in January of 2018. When I called to make my reservation in January, the earliest available slot wasn't until late May, which was fine by me. I was in no real hurry, besides the wait was worth it. But that should give you an idea on how booked they are if you are on short time. I'd like to introduce you to Jack and Ida Mitchell, whom these caverns were named after. The Mitchells came here during the Great Depression in the early 1930s to prospect for silver. Jack, whose real name was Jesse E. Mitchell, filed mining claims in this area. However, Jack did not discover the caverns. We know that the Chemehuevi people, a branch of the Paiute Native Indians, lived in and around these caverns as far back as 1,000 years. By the late 1850s, miners were swarming these areas, and the caverns were locally known as the Providence Caverns or Crystal Caverns. Jack Mitchell always had a vision of making these caverns into a tourist attraction and somewhat of a bed and breakfast for weary travelers on the nearby Route 66. He petitioned the state unsuccessfully till his death to add the caverns to the state park list. Even though Jack was out here as a miner, he never exactly found his fortune mining for silver, and whatever little he did earn, he put back into developing the area, like the stone-built houses you saw earlier, the piping to bring water down to the buildings from a nearby spring, and even part of the dirt trail you used to get here. The Providence Mountains are home to some of the oldest rocks on Earth and have been dated to the Precambrian geological period, which was over 600 million years ago. Think about that for a minute. That makes them older than modern-day mountain ranges like the Sierra or Rocky Mountains. They were here before the dinosaurs walked the Earth. They were even here when the land was all mostly one mass continent known as Pangaea. Now, the Providence Mountains and Mitchell Caverns did not form during the Precambrian era, but it serves as a starting point to describe the geologic setting of the Providence Mountains and Caverns. But before I continue, let me just say that I am not a geologist or subject matter expert. I am simply attempting to describe what I've learned as best as I understand it. So if I misstate something and you who are watching happen to know better, feel free to correct me or clarify something in the comment section below. So where can I begin? Well, first, it's important to know that land on Earth is not at all static. Since we don't get to live for hundreds of millions of years, we don't think of land as always shifting around. As an example, once we had one continent, now we have 7. Because of this, mountain ranges are constantly evolving, sometimes fully eroding away and then reforming again in a new shape. In the Precambrian era, much of land was still a steamy, fiery volcanic wasteland characterized by explosive eruptions, massive earthquakes, and flowing magma. But then something interesting started happening during the Jurassic era and into the Cretaceous period, which was around 200 million years ago. The Pacific plate began subjugation under the North American plate, causing an impression on land through most of modern-day Middle America. This impression fell below sea level and caused inland flooding connecting the Arctic Ocean with the Gulf of Mexico, forming what is known as the North American Inland Sea, which split North America into two land masses. During that time, much of what is modern-day California was also underwater. So try to wrap your mind around that and imagine this whole region we now call the Mojave Desert being a shallow, warm, clear sea. But Albert, what in the heck does that have to do with the Mitchell Caverns? Well, portions of the Providence Mountains are comprised of limestone rock, and the caverns are limestone caves. Limestone is a sedimentary rock and is comprised of organic materials like skeletal remains of shellfish and vegetation that died and settled on the bottom. Over long periods of time, these muddy, limey ocean bottoms accumulated over 4,000 feet in thickness, and pressure allowed it to harden into a rock-like material. The modern-day form of these mountains likely begun taking shape between 40 to 60 million years ago, and much of the sea had receded. Ancient fault lines caused the mountains to rise, and volcanic activity layered over most of the limestone, with lava that hardened into rock and also formed other parts of the mountains. After millions of years of material deposits and geologic mountain building, the conditions were finally ripe for these caverns to form. Because of this region's limestone buildup and turbulent seismic history, there are just enough fractures in the rocks to allow groundwater to seep through. The water creates a very minor acidic mixture on the softer limestone rock below the surface. Over tens of thousands of years, the rock begins to dissolve, which created these massive caverns. These gnarly-looking icicle shapes you've seen so far are called stalactites and stalagmites. They are formed by condensation and are comprised of mineral deposits from the limestone as water drips from the ceiling. Stalactites are the formations that hang from the ceiling, and stalagmites are the formations that form on the bottom. Stalagmites are formed by the water drops from their corresponding stalactites. When the minerals hit the floor and harden, they will continue to stack on top of each other and grow taller. Eventually, when stalactites and stalagmites meet, they are then called a column. You're still here? I guess if you've made it this far, I didn't bore you to sleep. The truth is, there's a lot more to the history of these caverns. I gave you a condensed, rushed version of it. Personally, I'm fascinated by this kind of stuff. But here are a few other things I thought you might like to know. The caverns maintain a fresh temperature year-round between 68 to 71 degrees. There are other limestone caverns like these in the world, but these are the only known caves in California. The tour is about 2 to 3 hours long. The Park Service has strategically installed neatly placed LED lights throughout the caverns, so most areas are pretty well lit, but there will be some areas with very low lighting. Lastly, I don't consider myself a claustrophobic person, but if being in really tight, confined, dark places is an issue for you, portions of this tour will be like that, so take that into consideration. I'll admit, in some areas I was starting to feel a little anxious myself, but nothing that would freak me out. I had to cut this video shorter than what I typically shoot for. I had well over an hour of footage and usually edit that down to about 20-minute episodes. I don't exactly have top-notch camera equipment, and the dark lighting rendered a lot of my footage unusable. But having said that, there is no better camera equipment than your own eyes. So if you're willing and able, I definitely encourage anyone watching to come and experience this for yourself. You'll be glad you did. Mitchell Caverns. That's going to be it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed watching that, and as usual, thank you for watching and coming along. Now I'm just going to be driving home. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment. This is Albert, signing off.